Yeah,
It is pretty
yeah.
exciting right now.
That
They've
is
been
cool.
getting incredible flutters, and so
So then you just have, I mean, a new group of people that,
yeah. So we have like four seniors that are going to
okay,
finish off the summer with us before they go to college after they graduate, and then but we'll be training like four others to kind of help take their place throughout the summer. So
okay.
for next year,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like sophomores, juniors,
That's cool.
yeah.
It's 3 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and kick off the meeting. The commissioners should have received in their packet. Oh, sorry. We'll start with a roll call.
Jorge Charnico,
Here.
Lee Peoples,
Here.
Anthony Blatt, Dylan Bradway,
Here.
Donna Cervantes,
Here.
Matt Guillory,
Here.
Tyler Holmes, Ben Sellers,
Here.
and James Farnham. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Paula. The commissioners should have received in their packet last month's minutes. Does anybody have any comments or revisions that need to be made to the minutes? If there are no comments, do we have a motion?
Move to approve the minutes of the February 28th meeting. Second.
With that, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The second was Ben. Thank you very much. Cases withdrawn, we have none this month. We have no cases for continuance. We have one case on the consent docket. Michael, could you give us a brief overview?
Sure. This is a proposal for the installation of a sculpture in the Plaza Courtyard area in front of 1739 Northwest 16th Street in the Plaza District. And because it is in compliance with all the applicable development standards and design guidelines for the district, it's been placed on the consent docket for your consideration. I do want to point out that it did this piece of sculpture did go through the review of the Arts Commission back in February, and they recommended approval of the art piece.
Does anyone in the commission have any questions for Michael? Does anyone out in the public want to speak in regards to this item? Okay, if not, do we have a motion to approve this consent docket?
So moved. Second.
Second by Matt. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion for the consent docket moves forward. Cases for individual consideration. As the chair, I'm going to rearrange things a little bit just based on how much time I think things will take. So I'd like to begin with UDCA 180010 at 1801 Northwest 16th Street in the Plaza District. Michael, if you could give us an overview.
Yes, this is a request for installation of a shipping container at the northwest corner of North Indiana and Northwest 16th Street. You may recall this operation from a previous approval that the commission granted approximately 2 years ago. It's for the Sasquatch Saved Ice business that has been in operation for these past year and a half or so at the southwest corner of Northwest 16th and North Blackwelder. Due to some events and potential movement and tendency of the building that this existing operation is in front of today, the owner-operators of this facility have requested, well, first of all, the original approval requested that they come back after 2 years to see how the business fit in with the Plaza District and so on and so forth. And so in part, that's what this hearing is about. But in addition, they have chosen to relocate their facility. And you may, if you've been to the Plaza District, you've probably familiar with their building. It looks like this. This is what it looks like in a rendering that kind of shows a location of it in front of the Lyric Theater building at the northwest corner. And you may recall when it did come through before, there was some consideration with respect to the fact that it was a little bit of an outlier in terms of building material and so on and so forth. But the Commission did grant approval with that requirement that they come back after 2 years. So what you see before you is essentially the same operation, same setup. The only difference is they're adding a screen fence to the side of the storage container to hide the ice machine that would be located outside the shipping container. So we've brought it back before you, and we're recommending approval of the project.
Does the commission have any questions for Michael?
Yes, are you, I remember the last time we approved this, it was like a 2-year approval, so is that what you're proposing today, or would it be a permanent?
Our recommendation today is just to approve it as is, kind of in permanency. We think that based on how it's operated the first initial period, there hasn't been any violations or complaints filed that we're aware of, and therefore we think it does kind of fit into the Plaza District environment, and therefore this is actually kind of a bigger plaza area. There's more room for it to kind of fit in. So our recommendation at this point is with no time limit.
Does the commission have any additional questions for Michael?
More of a comment than a question. Michael, I agree with you that this location gives it more room to operate and is not as shoehorned in as the last one. The fact that this is not intended to be a permanent structure, as the staff report says, and there is no permanent foundation, and it's out on a sidewalk, which works well because that building is not utilized in a way that it's going to be in conflict with the use of that building right now. I would rather see this done in some sort of a non-permanent basis, 5-year or whatever the case may be, to where once the exact conditions that exist today are no longer in place, this non-permanent structure, we do have a way of moving it. As the staff report says, it's not intended to be permanent, but once it's approved and it's installed and operational, there will be no way to require removal if we approve a permanent. That's just where I stand on it.
Any other commission comments? Is there anybody in the gallery that would like to speak? If you could, please sign in and state your name and address.
My name is Whitley O'Connor. I live at 1735 Northwest 12th Street in Oklahoma City. I am the director of Sasquatch Shaved Ice. I just want to say, so the idea of us moving, the landlord that we signed our lease agreement under became ill, and his sister took over the property and is now undergoing some fairly significant renovations of the property, which is really exciting. There's going to be some new tenants coming in, bringing new life to the area, and that was one of the reasons why we chose it, was to kind of activate this space. Now we think moving to this corner, one, we'd love to stay in the Plaza District because, as most of you know, our mission is to employ low-income teens from the Classen 10-pin neighborhood. And so staying in the Plaza District will allow us to continue to be in the district and easily accessible to our employees. As well as Michael said, this is a very large corner. It's actually much larger than the space we're utilizing now. And so we're kind of excited to have another opportunity to activate another spot in the plaza that, as Michael said, it's a beautiful building. Lyric does absolutely incredible work in the Plaza District, but this building isn't necessarily in the same vein as a lot of the other buildings where you have customers coming in and out. And so this will be a way to consistently bring people over to the corner to utilize that space. And we are certainly open to having it be something that we come back before you. I would request if you would consider maybe a 10-year situation. We'd really just kind of like to get into the swing of things without a lot of movement coming back. If that were to be considered, we would certainly appreciate that. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that would like to speak in regards to this project? Is there a motion from the commission?
I make a motion that we approve with the same condition as last time, but with a period of 10 years instead of 2 years to come back for further review.
We'll second that.
If there are no questions or comments on that, we'll go ahead and put it for a vote. All in favor? The second was Ben. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The case passes. Thank you very much. Second case for individual consideration will be UDCA 18-00001 at 624 Northwest 7th Street. Michael, if you could give us an overview, please.
This is an item that was continued from the meeting on February 28th. The proposal for a 3-story residential structure on the south side of Northwest 7th between North Lee and North Dewey. We had raised in our previous staff report some issues with respect to the applicable design guidelines in the cottage district, and one of them being compatibility and character with bulk and mass of the height of the structure as compared to the single-story structure adjacent to the east. And then additionally, we had raised a concern with respect to the design guideline that speaks to the issue of joint spacing, because the applicant is requesting to exceed the maximum dimensions for the joint spacing. The commission at that meeting had some additional more specific concerns that they discussed during that meeting, and those concerns related to the sheer square footage of the house and the mass and the bulk of the house, as well as the lack of differentiation in building materials on the structure. And as a means to, I guess, delve further into how that fits within the scope of the cottage district, the commission requested that the applicant provide a rendering of the proposed residence to give them a better sense than just the elevations that were provided of what the building would look like. And so here you have the elevations that were provided, and then this is the rendering that we received in preparation for this meeting. So in keeping with our practice, when we have a project that doesn't violate a development standard but does have issues with respect to design guidelines, we are recommending approval. However, we respect the fact that the commission may have more serious concerns with respect to the compliance with the guidelines and has the option to not approve it or modify the project as they see fit. So that concludes my comments on the project. I'm prepared to respond to any questions that the commission may have.
Thanks, Michael. Any questions for Michael? Is there anybody in the gallery that would like to speak on behalf of this project? Hi, Larry. If you could sign in and state your name and address.
Larry Pickering, 422 Northwest 9th. I'm here to represent the owners to the commission and to address any concerns you may have with the additional information that was presented, the rendering, the massing, the joint composition. So if you have any questions concerning that.
I'll go ahead and open up if that's okay. I think the rendering is very useful. My comments previously was the scale of the house and the fact that it lacked kind of visual character and detail really was going to make this stand out and make it seem even bigger than it actually really is. I noticed that the guidelines state that the material module should be 5 foot horizontally or 3 feet vertically, and we're going to a 12 by 12 based on the manufacturer's recommendation for the stucco. Is there a reason that the project couldn't comply with this 5 by 3 requirement?
Well, personally, I think the 5x3 would make it way too busy, because, concerning the mass, given the mass of the piece. We met, and we've come up with a couple of different things as far as concessions that could be considered by the commission to break up that mass, both with relief in the wall and also some massing placement, especially in regards to the third floor. So just considering the wall surface areas, we felt like the 12 by 12 was appropriate.
So are the concessions reflected in what we're looking at now? or-
They are not, because I met with them after that was submitted to you, so I just kind of made a shopping list of what we could or could not agree to, depending on the commission's concerns.
So can I ask Larry what those are, or how does this?
We don't want to design from the horseshoe, I don't think.
Well, so let me rephrase the question. How would you address my concern about this being a big, massive white box?
The mass is not going to go away. The program of the clients, it's their desire to build this structure, their home. The concessions that we talked about were relief in the wall. There's basically 4 masses plan-wise to the building: the garage, the patio, the living areas, and then the front living area. And that's reflected all the way up through the third floor. So taking basically 2 of those masses and providing some slight wall relief, 6 or 8 inches, either side, and just basically pushing in and pushing out those walls. That would break up the overall mass of the project by providing shadow lines and again, going with the joints. We felt like that would be a concession that we could make. Basically, the open area that you're seeing to the left, that's the patio on the first floor. So that line going up that right side of that opening would be one of those areas that we would provide some relief. To the left of that opening, that's the garage, and then there's a bedroom above, and then there's a roof deck. That would be another line that we could do that same thing on. So it's just basically providing some slight relief to the mast.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, is there anybody else in the gallery that would like to speak in regards to this project? Okay.
How much relief are we talking?
I would, depending on the plan of taking some space out, I was looking at somewhere at 6 to 8 inches.
So if this was something that we were to consider, would it be something that Michael and your group would take care of through administrative approval?
If it's the commission's pleasure to accept the concessions as they are described for you today, we could easily make sure that the plans that are submitted and stamped for approval on this project would reflect those concessions,
Okay.
rather than having to continue it for another month to see it again.
Okay.
Would the recess be on both sides of the building?
Yes.
Well, I appreciate that concession. I still have a concern of the overall mass of the building. I mentioned last month the house across the street that we approved in August of last year, 611 Northwest 7th, and it is a big house. I don't think it's as big as this, but I think it does a better job of breaking up the mass. So the first floor is very long and takes up a lot of the lot. The second floor is about half of the first, and then the third is a half of the second. And for me, that would go a long way to breaking up the mass. So I don't know if that's something you talked about with your client.
We did not consider taking any square footage out on that. The program is as desired for the spaces and that they want to have. One thing that we did talk about was pushing the third floor back, that we could make a slight plan change and take 8 feet out of the third floor and basically place it on the back. The stairway has to stay, in our plans, the stairway has to stay where it's at, but we could flip the bathroom and the front area of that third floor, which would give it more relief, essentially creating a two-story front on 7th Street for a good distance. And then considering the large lot next door that could be broken up into 2 single families or a multifamily dwelling, which is probably going to be as large.
So you would move, you're not reducing square footage, but you're
Not
taking it
reducing,
from the
we're just
front,
pushing
moving
it
to the
back
front.
another 8 feet. And there's another slight concession that we would consider, which would be an overall reduction in height of 3 feet, which would take 1 foot out of the first floor and 2 feet out of the second floor, and leaving the third floor as height.
I mean, I think those go away for me toward making this, more with what I think the guideline calls for and the downtown development framework calls for. I'm a little nervous, though, if we say yes to that and we're saying yes to these reliefs and things, that it's really changing quite a bit. And I mean, I hate to delay it, but I wouldn't mind seeing it. I don't know. Others may not care about that.
I wouldn't consider those to be significant enough changes for a continuance. I think Michael's comment as staff can police that through the permitting process.
Larry, 2 quick questions. What are the ceiling heights currently on the first and second floor?
12 feet,
12 foot?
12 feet.
Okay, so you're going down to 11 on the
11
first
feet,
and 10 on the
10 feet.
second? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that's acceptable. And then on the relief that you're talking about on the side, so the bump out of 6 or 8 inches, what would the sides of that be? Would it all still be stucco?
Yes,
or-
sir. Yeah, and we would be bumping in, not bumping out.
Okay.
Yeah, we would be taking some square footage out of the building.
I would say my biggest concern is along 7th Street, just because eventually, you're likely to get a building right next to it. So, the scale of it, to me, from 7th Street is a concern. Are there any other comments from the commission? If there are no comments, is there a motion? Oh. Oh, okay. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? I apologize. Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve incorporating the concessions that were stipulated, an 8-inch, bump in on both sides, an 8-foot transfer of the third floor from the front to the rear, and an overall reduction in height of 3 feet.
Are you comfortable with that being approved by?
Yes, to be approved by staff.
Okay. So I apologize. Could you repeat that motion just so for their benefit?
I make a motion to approve incorporating the stipulations that there be an 8-inch bump in on both sides as discussed, overall reduction in height of 3 feet, and a transfer of the space on the third floor, 8 feet coming from the front of the third floor and being moved to the back of the third floor. To be approved by staff.
And I want to clarify that there's, on each, the east and the west, there's 2 segments of recess?
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
We have a second by Ben. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next case for individual consideration is UDCA 18-00008 at 1804 Northwest 16th Street in the Plaza District. Michael?
Yes, this case is a little bit unusual. This project was originally approved back in late 2015, December 16th, to be exact, and it was approved by the commission with a variety of issues that were raised in the staff report at that time with respect to building materials and the side yard setback. Since it was approved in December 16th, 2015, there have been 2 revisions, one of which was administrative and approved by staff, the second of which was very recent, last September 2017. The project has started construction, but it has not completed construction, and the 2-year period for the completion of the construction under the original CA expired last December. The building exterior is pretty much completed. They have a lot of brick work to do at the front, and obviously all the interior work to do as well. But because the original CA expired, they had to file a new application to allow them to continue to build the structure so that they have a valid CA to proceed under. What you'll see in our staff report today for you is pretty much a reflection of the same issues that were raised by staff in the staff report in 2015. Again, we've discussed the concern that we had about compatibility of the building materials that were used. And I do want to note that in their action to approve the project in 2015, the commission acted to require burnished concrete block to be used on the exterior 3 sides, west, south, and east. The project that has gone up, unfortunately, did not use that burnished CMU block and used instead plain gray concrete block, and so it is not in compliance with the CA that was approved in 2015. Because the intent of having the burnished CMU was to have a smoother facade on those 3 sides, the commission has a few options. One would be to allow the plain concrete block to stand with perhaps some kind of coating, murals, or so on and so forth with that. The other would be to have them remove the block and replace it with burnished CMU. And a third option would be to cover the plain CMU block with stucco, some form of smooth stucco to cover those 3 sides. And then additionally, as we discussed in 2015, there was the issue of the side yard setback, which is a little unusual in that most buildings in the Plaza District go from property line, side to side. In this case, the applicant reserved a 16-foot wide area to the west side of the building, and initially that was for vehicular access to the rear of the site. They had a driveway proposed off of Northwest 16th Street. That driveway required a variance because of the angle that it took as it approached Northwest 16th Street. However, in the revision that was done just this last September, that driveway was removed as well as the curb cut on Northwest 16th, and the whole area that was a driveway has been replaced with outdoor dining patio area. The trash enclosure remains where it was originally approved, down in the southwest corner of the site. And at the time in 2015 when the project was approved, the commission felt that that side yard setback was acceptable and did approve the project with that distance to the west side of the building. So the issues before you today basically are, again, the building materials, which we've kind of covered, and then also the side yard setback. We have, as staff, recommended approval of the project with that side yard setback and to allow the plain concrete block to remain on the building. However, we're recommending a condition of approval that that block wall be covered on 3 sides, west, south, and east, with a smooth stucco finish to give it a more compatible look with the rest of the buildings in the Plaza District, and to essentially comply with the direction that the Commission gave in 2015, which was to use the burnished CMU block wall. So that completes our presentation. We're prepared to respond to any questions the Commission may have.
Thank you, Michael. Does the Commission have any questions for Michael? Is there anybody in the gallery that would like to speak?
Good afternoon, David Box, 522 Colcord Drive, here on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Jeff Struble, who is also here with me. As staff said, this is a bit of a unique case in that what we're seeking to do is to get it reapproved because we allowed the CA to expire. In the process of reapplying, we have engaged with our neighbor to the east, who has expressed some concerns with that east elevation due to the use of the concrete block. As staff indicated, one of the reasons that this commission wanted the use of the burnished material was that it was smooth and it would allow for perhaps easier painting for a mural. We do agree with staff's suggestion to use stucco. We believe the same result will be had, that being the ability to use murals on the side. We would ask, however, to just be required to use stucco on the east and west elevation rather than the south elevation, since that south elevation is in the alley and not readily viewable from the public right-of-way. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Again, it's an unusual case in that this is essentially what was approved by the Commission back in 2015. Unfortunately, the CA was allowed to expire, which is why we're here before you now to get reapproval of what was already approved a couple years ago. So we'd be happy to address any questions you might have, and we'd ask for your approval.
Are there any questions from the Commission?
Well, I would have a question for Michael. Is there smooth stucco elsewhere? Because that's the guideline mentions, that's one of the criteria. Do we see that smooth stucco elsewhere in the Plaza District?
Stucco is probably maybe the second most used material in Plaza after brick. I would say that it's a distant second to brick in the Plaza District as opposed to stucco. There's probably not a lot of stucco there, but under the circumstances, we feel that it would replicate the look that was intended by the previous approval of the burnished CMU block.
When we previously approved it, we had the burnished CMU on all the sides?
No, the front was brick, the
sorry, I
same
apologize.
as you see it here, but the other 3 sides were required to be burnished CMU.
So that's a little bit different from the request now, because you just want to do 2 sides, 2 of the 3 sides.
That's right. We don't want to do the south facade, which is in the alley. It's my understanding that I think staff is agreeable to that based upon the lack of visibility that that south elevation possesses.
Are there any other questions?
I remember when this case came through last time, and there was quite a bit of discussion about the CMU, the use of CMU, and in particular with regard to that west-facing wall, the fact that there's a lot of discussion about the fact that there's very few windows on that wall, and it's a large mass of just blank space. That the concession was to use burnished. This isn't something I can speak to. I'm going to ask the rest of the panel, I guess. When used skim coat stucco on top of CMU like this, what is the longevity of something like that? How well does that hold up?
Depends if it's done right.
I mean, I know there are places in the Plaza District, I mean, in the Paseo that do it, and they are cracking pretty quickly after it's done and not looking very good. So that's, I don't know if that was a installation issue or if that's kind of par for the course.
I'm going to speak maybe out of turn, but as an architect, it seems like there's a lot of cracking that happens. I think if you manage that through proper use of control joints and you tie them back to the control joints in the CMU, that tends to help it quite a bit. But there's no guarantee that it's going to last like as long as brick. Just obviously it's a different material and it's susceptible to workmanship on site. Are there any other questions?
It was mentioned that the neighbor is not pleased with this. Does the neighbor agree to these conditions?
Well, I'm not sure. I think the neighbor's here. We haven't been able to get a straight answer out of him as to what he wants to see. It's our belief that the ability to have stucco that will allow for a mural is in keeping with what he wants. But I believe he's here and can probably tell you better than I can.
So with that said, is there anybody else that would like to speak on behalf or in opposition of this project?
Yeah, my name's David Kennedy. I am here on behalf of the neighbor to the east, 1800 Michigas LLC. And I was going to speak briefly, and then Steve Sherman, who is a principal for that entity, wanted to speak also. My address is 1601 Northwest Expressway, Suite 1750. And I'm going to hand out some pictures we took yesterday, and then at least something we have thrown around as a potential solution with respect to what the east wall might look like.
Thank you. Did you get two of these? Okay, great. No. So if you don't mind, could you describe what we're looking at in the rendering?
The rendering is essentially, I guess, an ivy covering of stucco with respect, looking from the east to the west.
When you say ivy, you mean actually plants growing on it, not paint or color ivy, but...
No, I mean, it would have to be grown up, the wall. Okay, to get to the substance, I mean, really coming here today, we're primarily looking at a request for a continuance for 1 month. We're talking with our neighbor about several issues related to the alley behind our properties, the fact that their building in part encroaches on our property, the east wall, and then trying to get to some level of agreement on what is the east wall going to look like in light of the fact that originally it was supposed to be burnished cinder block, which would have had somewhat of a granite appearance, and now we're looking at just plain gray cinder block. And it's 32 feet by 111 feet, and it's pretty monolithic, and there's no architectural elements at all incorporated in where we're going. And the suggestion would be that, yeah, it'd be covered with stucco. That is certainly, one of the alternatives that I think dresses it up some. I don't know that just monolithically painting 3,500 square feet of stucco is a great answer to the question. I think it might need to be more dressed up than that, and that was the reason for a request for a continuance, so that we can get into some more detail with them about, okay, what's this really going to look like? What should it look like? What's some alternatives for something more attractive than what you're looking at in those pictures? In any event, the building is like I said, in part on our land. We don't consent, or, we certainly don't consent today to, the application that they filed, which basically didn't talk about stucco at all. It talked about cinder blocks. The other thing that I think is let's put it this way, disconnect in terms of where we are in talking and what they've got up for an application is, it's our intent with them to join to close the portion of the alley behind our respective properties. They were at some point looking at the idea that they were going to run trash service down the alley, and I think they're agreeable to that now. The depiction that you're looking at on the screen up there, though, has basically got the property, to their west property line, walled off with a gate, which really would preclude trash service coming out and being taken care of on 16th Street if we do in fact close the alley. So as it sits right now, I think the application is incomplete, and we would ask that it be passed off a month to allow us to get really to a final conclusion on what everybody's going to do here. And having said that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Just one note, the property line issue, that's not really an item for this forum.
I know that.
And then as far as continuance, I think that would have to come from the owner, the request for continuance. Okay, they'd have to agree to it. Okay. Thank you.
Could I ask a question real quickly? I'm a little confused. My recollection of the discussion of this last time is that the side yard setback is this large because they needed ingress, egress, because the alley is non-functional. Is that not?
No, that was the case, I think, when the project was initially approved back in December 2015. However, when it was revised in September of last year, we had been informed that public access had been restored in the alley. The applicant had taken steps with the Public Works Department to ensure that that access was available, and therefore that freed him up to not have that side yard setback as vehicular access, but rather to create it as outdoor dining patio area, and to have the trash collection conducted off the alley at the rear. Frankly, as staff, we support that concept because it gets a driveway off of 16th Street, which disrupts the pedestrian flow of traffic, pedestrian traffic along the street. So,
And originally, they needed a variance about the driveway off on 16th, but once they had access off the alley, that went away, which made a much better streetscape, we thought.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I am one of the owners, along with Steve Mason, of the property to the east. Steve couldn't be here because he's chairing a meeting about building a Girl Scout camp, but he wishes he were here. So let me address the alley situation briefly. The Maples Barbecue is going into the location on the corner, and that had previously been, up until the time we bought it, a Guatemalan restaurant their dumpster and their grease trap has at all times been out there. The building is configured as such that there's really nowhere to put those things inside. So I do think that we are striving for an agreement with Mr. Struble, but I don't know where we are right now. We do have an encroachment problem. It's a real problem. He built on our property. That was raised with him when the stone wall was this tall. It's now 32 feet tall. I talked to Mr. Philbrick numerous times, ran into nothing but dead ends, talked to the permitting department, the permit department, talked to zoning enforcement, code enforcement, talked to everybody and their dog, and couldn't get anywhere. So I don't really understand what difference it makes. I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but if there's no enforcement mechanism, that's an organic problem here that I see, because nobody seems to know how to stop the building while he's building. He has not stopped building, even though he hasn't had a CA since December. So I don't have it out for Mr. Struble, but what he's doing is impacting me significantly. And fair is fair. We all play by the rules. So I don't really understand. That's something I would ask that the commissioners look at. Also, notice-wise, I received no notices for any of this. Steve Mason, who owns property catty-corner to the subject property, has received no notices. So when I talked to Ms. Randall, your counselor, she indicated that perhaps that's not really a legal requirement, but I think all of us rely on it. I have 115 Park Avenue. I have 117 Park Avenue. I get notices constantly. If somebody's going to sneeze on the corner of Robinson and Park, I get a notice. So there's something that's missing here that I don't understand. But again, that's not the real issue. I think the pictures that I had requested that David Kennedy procure and pass out, those show the word monolith has been used. I would add the word feudal also. So it is just a monolithic, feudal-looking wall that if you stand on the east, which is the main part of 16th Street, and look west, it just stops it. It is like running into a wall. And so I had requested Mr. Struble stop, cease and desist, ignored. I talked to Mr. Philbrick at least 5 times. And all the other people, there was no way to stop this, so it kept going, going, going. The roof is on. The roofer was out there on my property. Mr. Struble took the liberty, and I think this is important to show you why I'm so agitated over this. He built to the property line and a little bit over. I have 3+ feet between his building and my building. He decided to pave that. That wrought iron gate that the plans call for on the east side of his building, that's my property, and it's not wrought iron. It is tube steel, right? It's steel tube, anodized probably. But anyway, things seem very inequitable here. He has no windows. If you're talking about the wall on the west, there is no architectural relief whatsoever on that east wall, and that is the main vision from the plaza. He doesn't want to stucco the rear wall. The plaza is moving south. That neighborhood is growing up, and I think everybody's delighted that it is. So I don't really know where I should stop and start, but, not getting notices, not being informed as to how to seek enforcement, short of a lawsuit, which I've been a lawyer for almost 40 years. I don't want to file a lawsuit. That's not my style. This situation, if he's not willing to continue this and you rule in his favor, then I will appeal this, and I will slow it down as much as I can, hopefully just to bring some cooperation to the table, not to be punitive. But I don't see any alternatives, frankly. It's in the staff report. I believe that Mr. Philbrick, I'm sure inadvertently misspoke. Originally, the staff report said that garbage should go out to 16th Street down the west side. In terms of eliminating a stop, the garbage trucks are there early. There's residences lining the street. This one more stop is not a big deal. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'd like to get a drink of water first, and see, I hope I can prevail on you to step back and see what this is doing to the plaza. It's a nice property. Maples Barbecue is going to be beautiful. I'm sure Mr. Struvel's building, I'm sure we can mitigate that wall if he plays ball on all other fronts. So, questions, anybody?
Are there any questions from the commissions for Mr. Sherman?
I have a question for you. Okay. Just for clarification, where did you say, in the beginning you referenced where your grease trap and dumpster are, and where is that?
They've sat on what is technically an open city alley. That alley has been closed. It was closed in the 1930s. It was reopened on contiguous to 4 lots, my 2 lots and Mr. Struvel's 2 lots. That is the only section of that alley that has been reopened. And I should have brought pictures of that because it has trees, brush, a fence across it between our properties. That alley hasn't been used for decades. And so now he wants to open it up, but we need it for our use. Not, if he does what he wants to do, then we're in trouble. And it doesn't make any sense to not close it anyway. Of course, I don't know where he stands on that right now.
And again, for clarification, the alley is legally opened at this point, correct?
I believe that's correct.
And the property owners that you purchased from agreed to that, I guess? Somebody...
Well, it happened in the 1930s. I mean, I've seen the records. I don't know what the impetus to reopen the alley contiguous to only 4 lots is, right?
But that happened within the last, year or so.
No, sir. I don't believe that alley's been closed since the 1930s. I believe it's been open since the 1930s. But it's not been utilized as an alley, ever. And I have a power of attorney representing the 2 owners that are south of the alley, and then I with my ownership, I would represent 75%, which is adequate to file an application to close. And then I would like to foreclose the city's right to reopen it. It's not a functional alley. And you can't get a garbage truck down there. That's one of the staff report states that it's basically untenable there's no room for a garbage truck to turn around. So if it pulls in, it's going to have to back out, and the staff says that they will not endorse that or support that. It's too risky. So I think this has had sort of I'm no student of these matters, but this seems to have sort of a storied past, this particular development. And how in the world it was decided that he wanted to use structural cinder block instead of what you all mandated, I'll never understand. And why he continued, I'll never understand. I have my opinions, but this is not an appropriate forum. So I don't know. To me, it's an insult. I don't know about you folks. It seems every time I called up here, somebody called him to say, hey, Sherman's calling again. And so there seems to be something going on. Everybody can draw their own conclusions. But those pictures, those are not doctored up. Those are real pictures. That is the ugliest structure on the plaza. He might say, gee, there are other 2-story structures. Yeah, I don't think so. On the northwest corner of Blackwelder and 16th, there's the something salon, and it has an incomplete second story. But those are 10-foot stories. Those are not 20-foot stories. And from the time you initially approved this in 2015 until now, he increased the square footage by 57%. 57%, and he increased the height by 14%. And those are significant numbers, and it is one darn ugly building. I will say the front of the building, it's not up here anymore, but the elevation showing the front is quite attractive. But other than that, it cuts off the whole plaza from the rest of the world. So.
Any other questions for Mr. Sherman?
It seems like there's a couple issues, some within our purview, some without, but to seek further clarification on the alley, it is currently an open, legal right-of-way across the Chiltepe's property and Mr. Strubel's property, those 4 25-foot lots, that is a public right-of-way. Is that correct today?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
But it has not been used for decades.
Okay.
You can tell by the size of the trees in the middle of it. It's an orphan alley. It doesn't go any farther west, and it doesn't go any farther east.
So Chiltepe's current grease trap and dumpster encroaches on the public right-of-way?
Yes.
Okay.
They're out of business, but
But the building?
It did, yes.
The future Maples?
yes.
Maples has encroached in the public right-of-way?
They have not yet, because they haven't opened yet, and they will make arrangements if they have to, if we can't get the alley closed, which all 4 property owners surrounding it, 3 for sure approve it, and a 4th, Mr. Strubel, may or may not approve it. I don't know.
Okay. So to clarify, it's currently open. Closing it is your request. That would block trash access to Strubel's property, but that is something that's out of the Urban Design Commission's purview.
So I would agree. That's something that, again, there's a different forum for that. As of right now, we have to treat it as if it was open.
Right, but our conversations with Mr. Strubel have been that he would, in fact, utilize the west side of his property for trash, but he did not modify his application before today. So that was the original staff recommendation, was to wheel it out the west side to 16th Street. And I have those documents if you'd like to see them. They're very convenient. And then somehow or another, and they wouldn't recommend the alley because it's dangerous to have a garbage truck backing out onto Indiana. Of course it is, especially in a pedestrian, dense area. So,
Any other questions for Mr. Sherman? I've got a question for Michael. So is the drawing incorrect and it was built per the drawing, or is the drawing correct and it was built incorrectly?
In terms of the material,
In terms of the encroachment on the adjacent property?
that's a survey issue that came up after we had anything to do with it. My understanding is they did a survey and discovered after the fact that they had built on the adjacent property.
Right, the drawing that they submitted that was approved showed a property line. We, staff, have to assume that it's legally correct, but it turns out it was not legally correct.
Okay, so
So-
in fact, we know today that the drawing is incorrect? Or was it built incorrectly? And I guess this is maybe a question for the owner. If this was built per the
What type
drawing...
of encroachment is
Yeah,
we're talking about?
How far of an encroachment?
between 1 and 3 inches.
Okay. I still kind of go back.
Sure.
I have a line of thought. Go ahead.
So we had a survey done initially. It ended up being incorrect. So when Mr. Sherman had a different company go out, we then hired a third company to get their opinion, and their opinion is that there is an encroachment. Ours shows somewhere around an inch or less. And so the initial survey that was performed by that company is what set us down this path. So
you're acknowledging that it is built incorrectly?
Yeah, and we're working with Mr. Sherman to try to get an encroachment easement, and we've indicated as many times as we know how to say that we'll support him in his effort to close the alley.
So does the drawing show it incorrectly? Or was it just a field engineer that put the stake in the wrong corner?
That. The engineer, the survey crew, was not correct on where the property line was. The property line in your drawings, I don't think is to the level of accuracy that Mr. Strubel would use to construct. He then hired a survey crew who misplaced a stake, and when they chalked it off, it was chalked incorrectly based upon the initial company that did the survey.
So if you built it per the drawings, it would be correct?
I'm not sure I understand what
Yeah,
the
they
question
did. The drawings show that the east building wall is on the property line. But when they went to stake out the property line, they staked it out incorrectly.
We built on what
So the
company-
drawing is still correct. The intent is
Okay,
that
so
the wall
that's
is
the-
on the...
You gave me the answer I was looking for, because if the drawing is incorrect, then I think, from my perspective, there's a certain line of action that I would want to take. But if the drawing is correct, then it moves on to a different form, and you guys just need to take the property line issue to court. Okay,
And Mr. Struble would like to address the commission if you...
go ahead.
You know, with the cinder block, I think there's a little confusion with our revision. I thought we got cinder block on the revision 6 months ago, and we were painting it, and I didn't bring the material, but the two cinder blocks painted look the same. But we are willing to stucco the sides, and we're willing to do some vines. Sherman and I have met with Meg Salyer. We've had several conversations in the last month to try to work some things out. And, you know, we're wanting to move forward with this. We have and so I think what he gave you, we're willing to do. We're willing to plant some vines. We're willing to stucco and put some colors that accent the barbecue place, his building. So that, if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, the owner of the Maples building brought up stuccoing the south. Is there a reason why you wouldn't want to stucco the south side of your building?
Just because it's in the back and it's not seen. I mean, that's not a huge issue. That's what we need to do to get approval today. I mean, I'm open to do what we need to do.
To me, that's consistent with what we voted
Yeah.
on previously.
And that's fine.
On that, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to approve the application on the basis the project meets the regulations and guidelines of the Urban Design Overlay District zoning ordinance as referenced in Section C and D of the staff report, with the condition that the applicant apply a smooth stucco coat over the concrete block on the west, south, and east elevations of the building.
There was some previous reference to vines. Is that not in
Not
your
part of
motion?
mine.
Okay. If you don't mind, could you repeat the motion, please?
I'll make a motion to approve the application on the basis that the project meets the regulations and guidelines of the Urban Design Overlay District zoning ordinance as referenced in the Section C and D of the staff report, with the condition that the applicant apply a smooth stucco coat over the concrete block on the west, south, and east elevations of the building.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second that.
Please go ahead.
If you approve the application as is, it mandates that the garbage goes down the back, down the alley. If that is what happens, he will not have a construction easement from me, and he will be trespassing, and none of this is going to get done. So if you have to, I think, procedurally give him the option to run the garbage up the west side of his property, if you mandate it out the south side and down to Indiana, it isn't going to happen.
I think that's outside, again, of this form.
It's part of the application, sir. It was addressed, it's been addressed and modified in his original, in his version 1, version 2, in a subsequent one, and in another subsequent one. And if it stands, if this is the only modification you make to his existing application, then he's going to have garbage mandated down the south side of his property.
I think I'll just address, I believe that garbage could still, if need be brought to 16th Street because it's currently a patio, so a wheeled dumpster could be pushed to 16th Street. I'm not a trash man. That's, again, outside of UDC, but...
Agreed. This isn't mandating that it goes to Indiana. If we have to clean it up administratively, we'll do it, but we understand that he's going to ask to close the alley. We're going to support that, so that would leave the only option to be 16th Street, which we're fine to do if we have to do it.
Michael, did you have any additional comments?
In the plans you have before you, the proposed trash enclosure is located on his property, not in the alley. It does face to the east and not to the south, so as to imply or infer that collection is off the alley. So depending on what kind of collection vehicle they use, whether it be carts or a bin, if the alley is closed, they would have to roll those bins to the front out on 16th Street, and we would have to make sure that the gate that he's proposed in the wrought iron fencing on the west side would be big enough to allow to those carts or bins to be pushed out to the street.
But so in theory, once that alley does get closed, he would have to come back and make a modification to that gate.
If what is shown would not be functional for the removal of trash, that would be correct, yes.
Okay.
Can I ask about the alley again? I asked a neighboring property owner about the alley. Can either Jeff or Mr. Box, one of y'all address what y'all intent is with the alley?
Yeah, we're going to support Mr. Sherman's application to close the alley.
Okay, so anything that we do here today, if he wants to close it and y'all are going to support that and the other property owners are in favor of that, then there's no reason that the alley wouldn't be closed, I would think. So anything that we do here today should reflect no functioning alley, correct?
Correct. And I think that's what it shows. I think what Mr. Philbrick said is that it's reflected on our property, not on the alley.
So, but I would think that we can only review what we have on hand, and that any future action would have to come to us if appropriate.
That is true, and as far as, I mean, they can agree whatever they want to as far as the alley, but that's really not in our purview. That'd be the city council has the authority to close and vacate alleys, so.
Can we make our...
I don't think we could make our condition on that.
Can we make a contingent on
because-
whatever the city council does in terms of...
No, I don't think so, because that's their legislative authority to close.
The only potential change would be an adjustment of the type and style and size of the gate that would, to allow wheeled dumpsters to be pulled to 16th Street.
Yes.
And that was probably administrative
Well,
modification.
yeah, that would be administrative, and then theoretically, if the alley is closed, then the new property line at the south end would be the middle of the alley, and they could theoretically move the enclosure to that new south property line if they chose to. On the other hand, they could leave it where it's shown.
Again, I don't think we should play the what-if game. I think we can review based on what's in front of us, and then if there's a later change, then it would come back to us or it would come back to you, and we would move forward that way. You put forward a motion, but I didn't open the forum up to the rest of the gallery. Are there any other comments in regards to this project? Okay, so with that said, we have a motion on the table for the, and did you second it? Okay, so all in favor of Ben's motion? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion moves forward. Thank you very much. So that wraps up cases for individual consideration. Other business, we have the Lincoln Boulevard Corridor Subdistrict. Michael, you're going to brief us on that?
Yes, the commission may recall that we initially brought forward the concept of this overlay district for your consideration at a meeting in September 2017. It was brought to you at that time just kind of as an introductory item to give you share with you the concepts that we had for the corridor. And we weren't seeking at that time a recommendation to the Planning Commission on the proposed ordinance. At this time, after a series of various delays for various reasons, we are bringing it back to you for a recommendation to the Planning Commission. I'm going to kind of run through the PowerPoint real quickly here. lost my copy. So, basically, the idea of the new district was precipitated by the state, came to us. Because the Commissioner of Land's Office owns quite a bit of acreage up and down this segment of North Lincoln. And they anticipate that some of these properties may be sold off in the coming years, and they wanted to partner with us to make sure that we had design guidelines and development standards in place to make sure that whatever development occurred on the properties that were sold was in keeping with the stature of Lincoln as it leads to the Capital District from I-44. So our initial reaction was to work with them to come up with a way to accommodate that. And we suggested initially, and they agreed, that we would bring this area under the guise of the Urban Design District, making all the projects that are within the corridor subject to review by the Urban Design Commission, similar to Northwest 23rd Street and Capitol Hill and all the other districts that are under your authority. The proposed boundary runs from on North Lincoln from Northeast 30th at the south end, which butts up to the Capital District in the purple here, and it runs basically all the way up past Northeast 50th Street. You may recall from the meeting that we had in September that there was a portion of this boundary that encroached onto this large parcel at the northeast corner of Northeast 50th and Lincoln. That is a large parcel that is under the control of the CLO office, and they have submitted a PUD application for that area. We have coordinated with them and determined that they have the same interests for their parcel as they came to us with for the entire corridor, and they expect to incorporate many of the same types of design guidelines and development standards for their portion, for their site at the northeast corner, and therefore that entire site has been excluded from our proposed boundary area and will be covered by the planned unit development when it goes through the process. Basically, as we outlined for you in the staff report, we proposing to have this overlay to accomplish a set of goals that are stated in the ordinance. Kind of reviewed it for you here on this slide. The code revisions include, like I said, bringing the design review contingent under the guise of the Urban Design Commission, developing a separate set of development regulations and design guidelines that are specifically designed and tailored for the Lincoln Boulevard corridor. We've also taken a look at the uses that are currently allowed up and down the corridor under the current underlying zoning districts, which are predominantly I-2, C3, and O2. As a consequence of that review, we've determined that a number of those uses would be considered incompatible with stature of the corridor as a primary entrance to the Capital District, and we would be, in this ordinance, recommending that a number of those uses be prohibited in the corridor. We did take care to make sure that none of the uses that we're recommending for prohibition in the corridor are out there on the ground today, so they wouldn't be creating any non-compatible uses with the code. And then we've also set up the design and development standards for the district to recognize some of the existing structures that are relatively close to the Lincoln Boulevard right-of-way, and predominantly we're trying to have the buildings pushed back a little bit so we have more of a broad corridor up and down the street, but we are recognizing there are some buildings that don't meet that criteria, and we've set up the regulations to allow those to remain and not create any nonconformities. So we have regulations that are being put in place for setback signs, screening, land use, minimum, maximum building heights, parking, fencing, and sidewalks, and also guidelines that relate to items that the commission is familiar with in some of the other districts they regulate, such as development pattern, relationship to surrounding development, parking structures, demolition, building design, so on and so forth. And some of those items have both standards and development, or excuse me, design guidelines. These are a lot of the existing uses that are allowed under I-2 and C3 zoning. We're proposing that all these uses would continue to be allowed. And then this is a list of the uses that are currently permitted under the I-2 and C3 zones that we feel are inappropriate for this location along Lincoln Boulevard, and therefore they would be prohibited within the corridor. Again, a kind of oversight of the overview of the development regulations we're contemplating. This table shows the current regulations for maximum building height. We're proposing to allow the height to go up a little bit from what it is right now, but we also have provisions in it that limit the building height when you're in close proximity to R1 zoning, and there is some of that zoning adjacent to the corridor district to the east along Lindsay Avenue. We also currently under I-2 and C3 do not have any minimum building height, but we're proposing a new one, a new standard here for that, because this is an infill corridor and we're trying to maximize and improve density in the areas where we have available infrastructure. Therefore, we don't think it's appropriate to build one-story structures, and we're therefore recommending two-story as a minimum. That's similar to what we have in Cottage District and a lot of other districts that we regulate. There are some exceptions to those rules. There are some commercial uses, such as fast food restaurants and gas stations, that don't typically build a two-story structure, and we've built in provisions to allow that to occur. And the setbacks are comparable to what's on the ground today or what's allowed today, so there's not a lot of change there. One of the big things that we see out on Lincoln right now, up and down the corridor from basically the north end to the south, is there are a lot of buildings out there that are fairly close to the street, but they also somehow have managed to get some parking in between the building and the street. And that's something we don't think is appropriate for the corridor, and we're recommending regulations that would prohibit parking lots or parking of any sort to occur in front of the building. They would either have to happen either behind the building or to the side of the building. Sign regulations. We've listed here on the left-hand side a list of the types of signs that would be prohibited, and you have an example of that, a pole sign down in the lower right corner. The other two images we've shown in this slide are examples of signs that we think would be appropriate for the corridor. We also have regulations for fences, and we've talked about on the left side some prohibited fence materials. The images on the right side of the slide show the types of fences that might be considered appropriate or compatible with development in the corridor. Proposed design guidelines. We have a series of guidelines that relate to development pattern, demolitions, building design, so on and so forth, and we've got a few examples of some of those guidelines here for you. The first being the development pattern and trying to get new development to concentrate mass and height at intersections and along arterials, and so we have a do this example on the left and an example of what we don't want to see on the right here. Then for the proposed design guidelines, we also have building design, and building design within the Lincoln Corridor subdistrict should promote architectural diversity while encouraging design that relates to and reinforces the overall character of the immediate surroundings, creating strong building to pedestrian relationship and supporting strong urban development. And so we've given an example on the left that shows what we feel is something that would support a strong building to pedestrian relationship, and then something on the right that would probably not be considered appropriate for the corridor. We have an example here of the streetscape guidelines. Essentially, you have a section pretty much from 30th to 36th that already has a developed streetscape on both sides of the street with this parkway and then a sidewalk and double row trees. We believe we have the right-of-way, the entire length of the corridor to replicate that streetscape all the way up from 36th to up to past 50th Street. So we're encouraging a continuation of that style of a streetscape. We're talking about parking and vehicular access, trying to limit the amount of drive cuts that occur on Lincoln Boulevard and encouraging vehicular access to come from either alleys or side streets, and to encourage cross-access easements between adjacent properties so you don't have to drive out to the street and to get to the property next door. It's pretty flat out there. There shouldn't be any grade issues from one property to another. Demolition, we're employing the same demolition criteria and guidelines that we have in all the other urban design districts that you're familiar with, so we're just bringing that entire section of the code over into this area to apply to the corridor here as well. You have some fairly significant, a couple of examples of fairly significant architectural buildings out there, both shown here in these images. And then we have some further guidelines about fences and building materials. Get a little bit more detailed with building materials here than we have in any of the current urban design districts, and it's maybe a sign of things to come for the other areas under urban design. And then we also talk about trying to maintain some compatibility between the uses in the corridor and the uses that are outside but adjacent to, making sure that we keep trash collection areas and loading docks away or screened from view of some of the adjacent uses. Project timeline, it's been going on for some time. We started in 2016 with this. So we met last on this on September 27th, and then today's meeting is the 28th of March. We are scheduled to go before the Urban Design Committee of the Planning Commission on April 12th, hopefully with your recommendation one way or the other on the proposed ordinance. And then from there it would go on to the full Planning Commission and eventually on to the City Council spring, May, June time frame, I think is what we're talking about here. So it begins to border on summer. But that's pretty much, in essence, an overview of what we're proposing to do with respect to the bringing the Lincoln Boulevard corridor into the realm of urban design. And we're prepared to respond to any questions the Commission may have and look for your recommendation to adopt the ordinance.
Michael, I sat through I believe both of the general property owner meetings. Were there any comments outside of that forum that you received from not just the property owners, but the adjacent community?
We didn't really get much in the way from adjacent property owners that are outside the district, and that particularly dropped off when we amended the boundary early on in the process to take some of those residential areas out of the boundary area. So that kind of went by the wayside. We have had, I'm going to say maybe 2 or 3 calls from people who are inside the boundary who have concerns about some of the standards that are being recommended because they have an unusual physical constraint with their property, either the size or the access or whatever it might be. And they asked that we might change some of the standards to recognize that, but our feeling was that we shouldn't change the standards for the entire corridor just to address some isolated incidents up and down the boulevard. And therefore, we basically explained to them that because they have the constraints that they do, that if these standards were adopted, they would have a clear case to apply for a variance and recognize their particular constraint. And we didn't think it was appropriate to modify the standards just for one or two examples happen up and down the corridor. But outside those meetings, that's about all the content we've had.
Great. Any other questions for Michael?
Just to follow up on that, passage of this wouldn't compel any of these property owners to make corrections, to come into compliance. Just the next time they added on or significantly remodeled, then they would have to.
I have a quick question, Michael. On the map that we have here with the area in blue, there's a property on the west side about a third of the way down that it looks like it's excluded, and then there's a property at on the corner of 50th and Lincoln, it looks like, that is excluded, almost like a donut hole. What's the purpose of those two exclusions, or the reason?
You talking about the west side between 42nd and 50th?
Yes.
Okay, that is a spud.
Okay.
And the same thing with the property at the southeast corner of 50th and 36th.
Okay.
Existing spuds. So even if we adopted the boundary.
Right, okay.
it would be under those.
I knew there had to be a reason, I just didn't know what it was.
Any other questions for Michael? I have kind of if there's no other questions, just how does the Innovation District, I know it's close to this, but is the Innovation District going to be a design overlay district?
Innovation District is a name that's thrown around a lot, but it's kind of a nebulous concept in that there's no defined boundary that I'm aware of. For the most part, it's my understanding that it lies south of the Capitol, by and large, and therefore there's not a lot of continuity between the two, and I'm not sure.
I saw a recent plan that actually had it going north of the Capitol, but it was the first time I had seen it.
Yeah, was that from this morning?
Well, I saw it, we were shortlisted for the Innovation District Master Plan, and the boundaries that we were provided at that time extended to the north.
That was the study area, was my understanding.
You're right, but it said Innovation District, and it went north.
No, I understand. I'm saying that image and those boundaries are from a study area being done by the Brookings Institute. So that's not necessarily going to directly translate into the boundaries of a design overlay.
So it's just an area that's going to be called the Innovation District, but there's no sort of design criteria that would go with it?
Not as you and I are speaking. I think that's the vision for it, but I mean, and they're just beginning their work.
Right.
Yeah, they're going to do the master plan, and then somebody will come through and discern what the design guidelines and regulations are. So this will be hopefully, will be on the books many years ahead of whatever overlay.
What about Northeast 23rd Street? Is that something that's being looked at as a design district?
Our direction in this effort has always been to focus on Lincoln as an access to the Capitol. We do recognize and understand that 23rd is clearly another access, but our direction in this effort was focused on Lincoln.
Well, if you looked at the impact on, Northwest 23rd, or I guess from west of 235, seems like the design district has had a really positive impact on that strip of land.
Yeah, we've been looking at Lincoln because it was a request of OMES, a state entity which was working with the commissioners of the land office, who are one of the primary landowners.
Right.
So they came to us, is where I'm going with. We didn't. It's a request of the immediate property owners to do this. So yes, if the folks on Northeast 23rd came in, we would help them develop something.
Great. Thank you, Michael. We've got some other communications. Sorry. We do have to put a motion forward. Is there a motion to approve?
It's to make a recommendation.
Is there a motion to recommend?
Recommend approval. I recommend that we I make a motion that we recommend approval. Excuse me.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor, aye? Opposed? Great, thank you very much. I'll move on to communications. Michael, you've got a couple of items on the administrative approval report.
Yeah, we had, item one is the development at the northeast corner of, I think, Hudson and 23rd, where the drive-through operation was approved next to Queen's Beauty Shop. They came back to us with an issue regarding a 3-foot fall across the property, and they needed to incorporate some stairs and ramps and elevated patio areas at the corner of the project, and that's what that revision's all about. Then we have one application in Paseo, just a replacement of a couple of double doors, and then also we had a sign, a canopy and a sign removed, and then a replacement sign put up on a business on the north side of 23rd, Northwest 23rd, near Penn.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the planning department?
Yeah, your next meeting is during the Arts Festival, so plan accordingly.
Thanks for the reminder. Any other comments? Comments from commission members? Next meeting will be April 25th. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.